Janice. Mike's on.
Thank you very much. I'll call this meeting to order. Welcome everybody to committee, council and committee. There are going to be two new people kind of running the meeting today. To begin, Laura Shaw. This is her first time in that position, and we appreciate it very much. Thank you for stepping up.
Thank you.
Outstanding. And we'll also be, the meeting will be chaired by a relatively new councillor, not that new, Benita Zerillo. I'll hand the chair over.
Thank you very much. So,
Acting mayor. There's a found. Acting mayor schedule.
so call the meeting to order. You did that already?
Yep.
Okay. And is there any other business items today?
I have received one notice of another business item related to the regulation of e-cigarettes raised by Councillor Zerillo. I don't have anything else on the list.
Okay, wonderful. Well, before we start, I just wanted to acknowledge that we have a former councillor in the room today, Neil Nicholson. There. Thank you very much, Mr. Nicholson. Okay, so I guess we'll move to the first item. Okay.
Our first item is a presentation regarding the Burquitlam-Lougheed Neighbourhood Plan. The General Manager of Planning and Development will provide some introductory comments, and the Community Planning Project Manager and the Community Planner will then present a community engagement video.
Hello.
Hello. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Council. Thanks for this opportunity. What I wanted to share with the committee today is a video prepared, and this is one of three videos. It's a sketch art video that the community planning group came to me a number of months ago and said, Jim, we're getting started with some major projects here, and we're always looking at ways, and council's always asking questions, how can you reach out, engage, inform, capture the interest of the community? And this has been used elsewhere, and they showed me some examples of the work. So, okay, let's...
Julie's stealing it from me.
So they said, let's consider this vehicle, this type of means of communication for these projects. And okay, so what's it look like? The next question, of course, is how much it costs. It's quite reasonable, surprisingly reasonable for the videos, and the quality is really outstanding. And it's an opportunity to really make them unique and specific to Coquitlam. And we make use of our own narrators too. So not actors speaking; these are actually city staff. So.
Oh, no.
You'd be surprised. We've got some talent here besides my council.
That's somebody who do a good voiceover.
So there's three of them, as I said. First is the Burquitlam-Lougheed Neighbourhood Plan. There's one we've put together about how development happens, and we'll be featuring that for council fairly shortly. And we also have one for Northwest Burke, and we'll make sure you see that too. In this case, we got a little bit rushed, and we're sorry, but we had to show it. We did show it this Saturday at the open house for the Burquitlam-Lougheed Neighbourhood Plan. I don't think that's disastrous, because much of what's shown in there that are in the panels anyways is material that council has seen, so it's nothing sort of out there. But we wanted to share it with you this afternoon. We'll also be shown this Wednesday at the open house at the executive inn.
Big round of applause on Saturday. Oscar nominations, anything?
Well, it's coming up, right? I think the nominations are in, though, so we may have missed the boat this year. But anyways, if I can, I'll just turn it over to Bruce.
Just before you move on, did you want to? Okay.
Just quickly, this is to make sure, further to some emails that we sent recently to council. This is just one piece that we wanted to show you. It's part of a very, very long list of our efforts trying to get out to the Burquitlam-Lougheed neighborhood planning stakeholders and public, making sure that we are trying to reach them in every different possible way we can think of, including, yes, we had a very strong open house this weekend with over 275 people showing up. Of course, there's the newspaper ads, the website, 10,000, a little more than 10,000 direct mailers. And my thanks specifically to Aubrey Jensen and Andrew Merrill from Community Planning and Communications, who's been just a wonderful team to play with. So thank you.
Coquitlam is one of the fastest growing cities in the Lower Mainland, and with the planned arrival of the SkyTrain in 2016, it is important to plan for the future. Coquitlam has been planning for the SkyTrain for some time. In 2002, we worked with the community to develop the existing Burquitlam and Lougheed neighborhood plans. Much has changed since the original plans were adopted over 12 years ago. That's why Coquitlam is taking a closer look at the existing plans and updating them to continue to ensure a high quality of life over the next 20 to 25 years for area residents. We want you to get involved and make sure your voice is heard to help shape change in your neighborhood. The Burquitlam and Lougheed neighborhoods border with Burnaby to the west, Port Moody to the north, Trans-Canada Highway to the south, and Blue Mountain Street, along with the Austin Heights and Mayardville neighborhoods to the east. In 2012, the city developed the Transit-Oriented Development Strategy, also known as the TDS. This strategy supports development around transit stations, with taller buildings, walkable and pedestrian-friendly streets, and a mix of different uses to allow people to live and work within walking distance of the SkyTrain stations. Studies show that people are willing to walk 10 to 15 minutes to get to SkyTrain or good quality shops, and that's why areas close to the SkyTrain stations are identified as potential locations for the highest concentration of uses and the tallest buildings. The TDS focused change in two areas: a core area that is a 5 to 10 minute walking distance from the stations, and a shoulder area that is a 10 to 15 minute walking distance from the stations. The area between stations along North Road also has strong connections, providing potential opportunities for redevelopment. The existing Burquitlam and Lougheed neighborhood plans, as well as the TDS, focus apartments, shops, offices, and public spaces within a 5-minute walk of each SkyTrain station. Here, residential buildings will tend to be higher and will generally decrease in height and massing as we move away from the core. Different housing types, such as townhouses and 3- and 4-plexes, could be considered farther away, so that new growth blends into established neighborhoods, about a 10 to 15-minute walk from a SkyTrain station. It is important to stress that the TDS is a high-level vision that provides the foundation to guide more detailed neighborhood plans. It also plays an important role in guiding current development applications. These plans also place an emphasis on making living more affordable through giving people expanded transportation choices, which can reduce their cost of living. The city understands that housing affordability is a challenge for many people in our community, so work on the housing affordability strategy is currently underway and will help provide a context for neighborhood plans. These are some of the challenges Coquitlam faces as we update the neighborhood plans. The SkyTrain brings new opportunities, including the chance to update our neighborhood plans to help ensure we build a great community. The neighborhood plan is a key tool that will make that happen. The updated Burquitlam and Lougheed plan will provide a vision for future growth and guide current development. A neighborhood plan also weaves together citywide policies, strategies, and objectives with a focus on the neighborhood level. The plan will help create and guide the development of community amenities, walkable and transit-friendly communities, a variety of housing types, distinctive shopping and employment districts, parks, playgrounds, and trails, healthy natural environments, and unique places within each community. Overall, these elements help to improve our quality of life. New development also helps provide upgraded infrastructure and new amenities to support the neighborhood through fees and charges. These include development cost charges, which support parks, arterial streets, and water and sewer infrastructure, and community amenity contributions and density bonusing, which can support public amenities such as parks, plazas, greenways, community centers, and other public facilities. It is important that the new development contribute to new amenities that are required by our community. The process of updating the Burquitlam and Lougheed neighborhood plans involves a lot of consultation with the community. We all want our neighborhoods and our city to meet the needs of renters, homeowners, families, youth, seniors, recent immigrants, business and commercial property owners, developers, and community groups. It's a lofty goal, and it's not an easy task, so it's important that as many people as possible get involved. To do this, we've set up a public advisory group made up of a wide range of community members, and we will also hold a number of public information sessions where you can have your say about the plans as they're developing. If you're interested in getting involved, please visit the project webpage, where we regularly update details on the progress of the neighborhood plan, provide dates for community information sessions, and provide opportunities for your input. With your neighborhood perspective, we are striving to ensure that the Burquitlam and Lougheed neighborhoods continue to be great communities.
Dennis.
Yeah, just a couple of quick comments. I took the opportunity to attend for a little while on Saturday, and I must say the presentation was tremendous. I was pleasantly surprised by the turnout and the mood of the folks that were in attendance. Very upbeat, really looking to be engaged, looking for as much information as possible to give them some idea of what was happening in the area. So that was really good. Good diverse cross section. I talked to some kids in their early 20s. And to some seniors. The big piece that really I think they're looking for is, again, more of this communication. So I encourage this type of format. I understand we're doing it again Wednesday, I believe it is, and really build on the work that's been done with it. Employ that as much as you possibly can. Heard some good comments about the video. The staff at each station was spectacular in their interaction. The one piece that I do have a question about is a lot of the sticky notes, whether they've been on the map or whether they've been on the individual pieces. A lot of specific comment. Do we get, as council, the verbatim comments back in the report, or are they summarized?
Right now, we're going through the first. Thank you, Chair. Right now, we're going through the comments. We record all of the verbatims. It does take a bit of work. Those not only stay with planning, but they go out to our core review team as well. The other departments that are available to it. We usually provide a summary for council and a presentation when the phase is done. Certainly, the verbatims are definitely available. They're thick, but they're definitely available.
Yeah. Okay. And again, I don't know that we take time to read through every single one, but I think that is valuable, and that's one of the pieces that people did ask for. Is that if I take the time to write this down, are you guys actually seeing it?
Are you going to hear it?
So.
No, if I could, that's a good point. And particularly with this project here, there's been a lot of material prepared, like a lot of good material that covers a number of bases. What we've been trying to do is give council a heads up on that, get copies of that either online to you or up in the councilor's office. That sort of stuff. The verbatim could be at length, but it's there. It's part of the public record, and by all means, you should see it. So we'll take that away.
All right. Just last comment. Then I think it was a great job. It was very well done. It was very well received by the public. So thanks. Really positive impression.
What's the read?
Well, that is a great piece of work. Finally out of planning, we get something that talks directly to the people in lay people. It's absolutely great. And the nuance of, as the artist with a very fast hand was building, it just sort of set the tone for building, and that's where we're going. It's a great piece of work. It truly is. I'm proud of you all. The question that I would have is, at the meetings, I think the one piece that's missing would be, and this is just because I'm listening to what I'm hearing back, is do we have a brochure, I know we have one, of housing choices? Because you keep talking about the different housing choices in here, and I'm thinking not specifically. You could probably go into the apartments and what zones they are, but really into the quadruplex, the triplex, and those ones. And I would say opportunities if your lot is 10,000 square feet, if it's 4, if it's 8. Because a lot of the people that are attending are wondering what they can do with their lots. And so if we just had a brochure that was housing choices that you could hand out, then they'd be right in the loop. But this is great. This is really, really, really good. I'm proud of you.
Thank you. If I could just, a wonderful group we found, Adjacent Media, a local group, ridiculously reasonable to work with, and we've had a great time with them. Staff, as I mentioned, did a tremendous amount, the writing and the formatting, the production, and the voicing, but they're brilliant.
Absolutely, yeah. You really spoke to the people, and I'm really happy to hear that.
On your other point, I was remiss, and we'll make sure these are in the council binders. We've been developing a series of handouts now.
Yeah.
Some of them are around the same level. They actually coordinate because they use a lot of the same graphics.
Yeah.
One of them is just on how growth is funded.
Yeah.
The other is just what planning terms are. So when people talk to us about it,
yes.
The one, because you're right, about half the people at the open house reporting were talking about how I get more development.
Yeah.
The other half, we're more concerned about how it happens.
That's right.
And we do have materials, again, it's all sort of linked together. This one talks about that there is a plan in place now, the TDS then carries it, and what the new plan does.
Yeah.
So it's about how we continually improve our plans and our process, and we literally couldn't keep the stuff. We were just opening the bundles and passing them
Absolutely
as fast as we
perfect.
could.
And the thing they're most interested in is some of them, everybody, what's in it for me? If I were living there, I'd want to know if I had a big lot, what best can I do with it? And
Exactly. And we anticipate the same thought or interest in the Northwest, in that Northwest Burke area. So that's
and
what,
down here, coming down Port Moody Hill into this part of Coquitlam as well.
so that's why there's the second video. It's sort of a development 101.
Yeah.
And it's really well done also. And
Yeah.
we're just putting the final tweaks on that. But we'll be showing that to council. The idea has been to have that available for people. And
Yeah.
that's sort of an ongoing, enduring information piece as well. The other thing, the beauty of this work is, I'm amazed it got done so quickly. We were editing this just a week and a half ago. With this type of medium, they can go in, and as long as you don't get too carried away with the changes, they can be done fairly easily. It takes a lot of effort, but they can be done. Doesn't mean you have to go back to square one. And, it's a huge collective effort, and it's great.
Yeah.
Great
So
meeting.
then the other piece on housing choices would be, what if I have a lot that is, 7, 10, 12, the options for them? Because a lot of people don't understand that you can have a house with a suite and a lane house as well, or just a house and a lane house or whatever. That's the questions I'm getting. Thank you.
Next Stuart.
Yeah, again, I'll, on behalf of all of council, please pass on to each department our thanks for that. Yeah, that's the best I've seen yet. That was an outstanding session. Catherine, everybody from the various departments, YMCA was represented, and I think it worked really, really well. The video itself, outstanding. The voice was a better voice, because like on the weekend, some of us were at another event where the voice was too deep and booming.
Nothing wrong with deep and booming.
Nothing wrong with deep and booming. Yeah, the Chamber of Commerce, of course, featured our own Councillor Marston. On the brochure side, I echo those comments that I really like a printed single fold that sets out enough information, moving away from the language of planners into the language of the public.
The best comment I heard, sir, somebody said about the voice on that video was the best thing about it is it has a mute switch.
Yep, there you go. There actually was a surprise.
Like real time.
One of the surprises that, because we have these impressions of each neighborhood, and we have the impressions of people that live there based largely on one person or whatever, sometimes, or based on the discussions we've had among various people. And there was a couple of people from Vale that said we're talking about wanting their street to get moving and start the process of rezoning, and suggesting that there was more acceptance of that, at least in the 5-minute circle, or even in the 10. So I think this process is going to produce a wide range of thought. I also heard from a number of people up in the Blue Mountain and Austin, but Blue Mountain and Como Lake area, for example, who were interested in the housing choices, and this was the closest event that they could go to. Their comments weren't Burquitlam. Their comments were or Lougheed. Their comments were, how do I get a carriage house for my disabled son? How do we move through some of the planning processes, and how do we get rid of the monster houses and that sort of stuff? So it was a really good. I ended up there 2.5 hours. So.
All right, Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, just one final thing on the narration there. It's often said in the broadcast industry that a good narrator has a face made for radio.
We are using different narrators for the next one.
Anyone else?
Touche.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that.
Item 2 are the minutes of the council and committee meeting held on Monday, January 26, 2015. The recommendation is that the committee approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councillor O'Neill, second by Councillor Hodge.
Ooh, what was that? Resting our
Any
tables?
discussion?
Hurricane Wilson.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Our next item is a progress report on the draft housing affordability framework, and we have introductory comments by the General Manager, Planning and Development, and a presentation by the Project Manager.
Welcome back.
Well, welcome back,
Welcome
Mr.
back.
McIntyre.
You again.
Oh, welcome back.
Hey! Deja vu.
Yeah,
My radio sidekick.
they just need to stretch your legs.
Sorry, no video, but just a few opening remarks, and then I'll hand it off to Bruce. And he's got a PowerPoint presentation to supplement the report. We were last at council back in October with the proposed consultation program for the draft housing affordability framework, and we got the direction from council to proceed, which we've been doing. There's been a lot of good work that's occurred since then. We didn't want to sort of lose pace or momentum. That's what we've been at it for the last number of months. And we can get into that detail if you wish. But we're also cognizant that with the recent election and some new council members on board, we thought it would be timely to just do an update, just to check in with council, just let you know where we're at, some of the initial findings we're getting from the consultation to date, and where we're going from here. And also give a sense of where does this fit into the overall program of this project. So that's what we wanted to have early in the year, is this sort of midterm reporting in. It's our intention to carry forward with the consultation, report back to council with the results of that consultation. Undoubtedly there'll be some discussion and maybe some debate at that time, and provide the necessary direction for staff to really complete, well, to write up, flesh out the strategy, complete the project, or complete the overall document for council's final consideration. We've been at this for a while, a couple years now, and we've got development applications that are pending, that are kind of groping around without some policy. And I think this is one we really need to get on with. So my ask to council is, if you have questions today, some direction for us, we welcome that. We want to carry on and move this project forward, bring it back to council so a final decision can be made. I think this needs to be concluded. And so that's my ask of council. Let's apply our best efforts to get this one done. So, on that, I'll turn over to Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. McIntyre. Before you start, can you just give us and for the audience, just an idea of how many slides you've got?
You bet. Sorry, I ran up through the time. It's not a long piece. I think it's 14 slots.
Perfect. Just so we know what it meant.
Thank you. Thank you, Council. The proposed housing affordability strategy consultation program went to Council on October 6th. At that time, we were directed by Council, and it was really strong direction. A lot of words like broad, fair, and informed, asking us to make sure we up our game a little bit in terms of how we do our consultation. We thought this was a very good time to check in with you on that process and just sample some of the feedback that we're getting to date, and identify certain areas that we've been tweaked at, that we are currently investigating a little further, either as directed previously by Council or items that have come up to ourselves. As I think Council is very aware, we've moved from a discussion paper outlining a background to inform people to the framework. The framework was really intended as a piece that we can be a litmus test with people. We can ask them how they respond, give us something to dialogue around. But our intention is, of course, to refine that strategy further and bring it back for Council's consideration. We're really using our consultation in three directions, or three target groups. The public, of course, we're always very interested in engaging that and having a feeling of what we're doing, but also very much so what our stakeholders would be. And consistent very much with the theme of this particular draft, making sure we understand what is the city's role. We are really very open about asking for partners where they think their role belongs and what they think they will contribute. Immediately after October 6th, we did receive some unsolicited requests to come immediately to a few groups, and we did. We went and visited 4 different groups in early October and early November, or sorry, late October, early November, including the UDI Tri-Cities Homelessness Group, the Tri-Cities Seniors Planning Network, and the Universal Accessibility Advisory Committee. Feedback in general, I mean, we will detail it more as we conclude our consultation. feedback in general stressed the need that some groups were looking to see more income-based specific goals and targets in the strategy. Tell us what you're going to do, report against that. To strengthen the rental housing strategy, specifically a lot of discussion around replacement that we heard. Making sure that any strategies we look at, make sure there are no regulatory barriers to things like co-housing, which is particularly desirable by some seniors groups. And to make sure we're promoting accessible design, and when we deal with accessibility, making sure that we have a very flexible definition so that we can accommodate the diverse range of needs that often we talk about when we're dealing with accessible units. Responding again to some of Council's direction, we went a slightly different way and we added a layer in our consultation program. We decided to engage in ideation exchange, which is a very web-based, real-time workshop. One of the advantages here is we invite representatives of organizations. We make sure they have a copy of the framework. We then do some presentation and warm-up material and discussion. And then we go into an interactive discussion, soliciting their ideas and letting them talk to each other. That allows us to do a comparison and a consolidation of some of the feedback as we move on. Overall, we invited 61 organizations to 3 different sessions. Our first session was the development industry, who originally when we met with them requested that they meet with us in a more meaningful way. That occurred right before Christmas. We'll be doing government, community service providers, and advocacy groups again this month, as well as faith-based communities that have asked to come and speak to us. And we have reached out and invited community associations for the same piece. Because we've done the one with development industry, I have a little more feedback from that group as of this time, but make sure the other 2 groups are brought up to speed and inputted for you as we conclude our process. But ideally, the development industry feedback, we were extremely pleased. They were very, very positive in terms of what they described as a very meaningful process. We got quite comfortable, actually opened some performas. They cross-checked some numbers to each other, and many of them commented, if not every single one commented, that they felt this was a very substantive and real way to have a dialogue. In terms of positives, they were quite interested in the shared equity approaches that we've suggested could be one option. They felt that we were quite strong in terms of our contributions through the density bonusing program, because the program itself is quite fair and transparent, and that when they're looking to go forward, they know what the rules will be. And the suite of incentives, which we put out as policy 1.2, which is in the framework at page, I'll turn it up, 8, they felt that was workable. That for large multifamily developments, especially when you're dealing with purpose-built rental, they felt that there might be something that they'd be interested in doing there. On the work-to-do category, that same suite of incentives just doesn't pencil out in terms of a 4 to 6 story wood frame kind of multifamily. So in that regard, the type of incentives that we sort of have left on the table between ourselves and their discussions just didn't seem to be able to move the needle at all. If, of course, that's something we want to get into. But I think it meant a useful exercise to make sure that if we're going to have a policy, we understand if industry says that will or will not work. We want to continue to examine parking reductions along the transit corridor. That was a continued push from industry. And they also made sure that while they appreciate flexibility at moments, when they're looking at making the purchase decision, this is one where they actually, as opposed to what our policy framework now says, which is please come forward to us with a proposal, what you're interested in doing, industry was quite strong in saying, we actually want to know what the goalposts are. We want to know what your requirements are so we can work that into our purchasing decisions. And raised to ourselves was, from them, was that when we ask industry to come forward with any ideas or proposals, they have stressed to us that they're very much a Metro Vancouver organizations in many ways, Metro Vancouver developers, and they may not necessarily know who the best people are to speak to. So their question was, is there some organization, some outfit out there that has a bit more of a quarterback role, to use the sports metaphor. As I mentioned, we'll do 2 more of those ideation sessions coming up very, very soon. And we will also then move to a general public consultation. We are planning an open house. That'll be February 18th. It'll be here in City Hall. We do have that up on our website. We are running a few newspaper ads, as well as, of course, other social media activities. And we're looking for the public to provide input in general, not only in the open house, but also on the web page itself, where we do have comment forms, etc. Our webpage, we feel we really crossed our T's and dotted our I's. There's a process overview. The complete discussion paper is linked there, as well as the strategy. We've also developed a small summary handout for some people who prefer that level of material. Our email listserv is up and, again, pushing out that information, including about the public open house. And we do put additional contact and request comments on the web. In terms of further investigation, we feel we can still sharpen our pencil a little bit in terms of policy development around the affordable living concepts. The real push here that your rent or your mortgage is only a slice of what we should consider as affordable, and looking to see where the city does or does not play in that. We certainly are aware that very recently in the press we've seen quite a few comments related to Coquitlam and the rental market tightening up. We want to understand some of the methodology, some of the thinking in those studies. It was asked of us from council that we understand or come with an opinion piece on the effects of housing affordability with foreign investment. We are ready very shortly to present on that. And the role of partnerships. This continues to be a theme. How you coordinate all the different players. As mentioned, we identified very easily 61 groups to invite. How do you coordinate them to leverage and play together? Our Housing Choices program is not having a substantive uptake at all. We do need to reevaluate that. That is on the work plan of community planning, so that I think we were a little ahead of the curve. Our housing typologies, we're seeing, this is very interesting to me, Council, we're seeing some real swings in duplexes, narrow lot singles, and secondary suites. In secondary suites, what we're seeing right now, we need to understand a little more. Why are these short-term trends or long-term trends? What could we expect the market to bring in terms of secondary suites on its own, just so we can understand the scope of the issue. We are very much aware that co-op housing is a very good alternative methodology, and we have several good co-op housing projects in Coquitlam. Most of them are performing quite well. We do recognize there is a situation with one of them right now, and we do intend to dialogue with them and make sure our strategy within our role fulfills that need. And finally, a never-ending battle seems to be to try to understand apples to bananas to coconuts in terms of other municipal policies, making sure we can line them up. There's always definitional differences, reporting differences, but we do know we can learn. We can learn from what other cities do, and we can study it, and we can perhaps propose a few ideas. So in terms of conclusions and bringing this to fruition, we'll complete 2 ideation workshops in February. We are cognizant that we need to make sure we're talking to some co-op housing providers and possibly going to community associations in different ways. Our public open house in February. And once that consultation is complete, we will start to redraft the full strategy and implementation plan, which we envision doing in March, and trying to bring that draft strategy for council discussion and direction in the spring of this year. And of course, obviously, council will tell us, are we close? What do we need to investigate? Are we there? And we'll look forward to that review. And that concludes the presentation.
Okay. So, Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you for the presentation. Outside viewer might look at this process and describe it as time-consuming or glacial or something, but it's actually rather relentless. It's got a momentum, and it's maybe not the fastest thing, but it's certainly an important piece of work that we need to take our time on and do right and do correctly. And I'm glad that glad for getting this update. It's an issue that I actually tried to raise during the last campaign. Spoke about it a few times. Had written about trying to get people engaged, and there's been some really good engagement now based on with the reports and good feedback. I thought it very interesting. The thing that really stood out was this the parking relaxation for rental and things for lower costs. And that, to me, that was something that we've talked about in a lot of different areas regarding the parking requirements for suites in transit zones, and it's interesting to see it coming back again from the industry. The big thing, February 18th, going for a public open house, and what I don't see right now, and what I'd like to see, is where the rubber meets the road from a taxpayer point of view. What are the costs going to be here? What money does the city have to put on the table or take off of the table for general use? If there's going to be incentives given, does that mean that the city is going to be giving something up that would otherwise come into city coffers and otherwise be for general use? And I don't see that here, and I think the taxpayer really needs to see that to understand the ramifications. And specifically, the Housing Affordability Reserve Fund, well, I think I don't see it in here, and I don't know if the consultation with the industry and all the other groups has spelled out all the different possibilities that might take place with the Housing Affordability Reserve Fund. Everything from wrapping it up to ramping it up. We need to have that put before the public very specifically with some dollar figures beside it. Tell them what's in the fund now. If it stays at the same level that it is now, with the same general amount of annual income coming into it, how big it will grow, whether it should be capped, whether new sources of income should be tapped to make it grow even more, and what those might be. These are dollar and cents important things that the taxpayer needs to know about. It's not just all of these policies and everything. They want to know how it's going to affect their pocketbook. We have a lot of people who aren't actively involved in this. We have smaller numbers of people who are, and they're having their say. But finally, this comes down to what the general taxpayer can afford and is willing to support financially. That is very important. I've been speaking about this issue in that way for a couple of years now. I spoke about it during the campaign. And I think we need to put that very squarely in front of the public by February 18th for sure. And that's all I'm going to say right now. Thank you. Unless you've got some response about what you've done in that set. I don't think you've done it as specifically as I want, and maybe you have touched on it in some way, and ask the chair to,
Yeah.
is it okay?
Do you have any comments that you wanted to share with Councillor O'Neill and the group here?
Just quickly respond to that through the chair. I'll also have a few comments from Bruce. Has been more in call with Kathy when we're face to face on the consultation efforts so far. And as it's pointed out in the material, it talks about the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund. You know, we're not hiding that, and it can be described, and it's there, I guess, potentially as a source of funding for these policies, these programs are ultimately approved by council. If what we're hearing is for more specific information around that, we can pull that together and have that there. And if there's a desire at council to put that question to the community, you know, I actually kind of appreciate the term, wrap it up or ramp it up, or is it something in between? So we're prepared to do that. We haven't been hiding from it, but in terms of the specific discussions around the numbers and that, I don't believe that's happened, Bruce, but I'll let you speak to that.
We've been able to, the specific question, related to, spelled out all the different possibilities. We have been having dialogue related to a trade-off within the density bonusing kind of formula, and a dialogue that suggests the more you have on the affordable, the less you might have. But we're talking very...
Less you might have
So
for other things.
density bonusing, 90 cents on the dollar really goes to community amenities. We'll describe what that is. 10 cents on the dollar might be earmarked, which equates to 20 to 25 million over 20 to 25 years, right? Which is that piece. What that doesn't do thoroughly enough is those are huge numbers. I mean, 200 million on one side, 20 million on the other side. And I think we still need to drive down into what those numbers could mean as an output. I think they're still very broad in our conversation, and we haven't been able to sort of drive them deeper than that.
Sure, and this is the first time I've heard a figure like that in public, or I don't think I've heard.
No.
Have we heard that figure?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 25 million. Yeah. Over.
Okay, sorry, thank you. Okay,
Yeah.
That 200 million. Okay, sorry.
So that is
Okay,
actually
good.
out in
Okay, good.
several of our
Okay, thank you.
reports.
Over 25
What I
years.
think we
Okay.
need to do
Thank you.
still connects it to what our role is, and the size of what we think the problem is, and then says, what does that do for us in units? And really the interesting thing starts with, which part of that is our job, if any? And then second is, what kind of units are you talking about? One of the very interesting things that industry was able to do with this is we actually pulled out a few performas of Coquitlam sites, and we just asked a theoretical question. Theoretical, because I'm exploring policy options. What would it take, what would the incentives financially need to calculate to move that from a strata development, a 4 to 6 wood story, to a rental?
Yeah.
And the numbers were somewhere between 6 and 8K a door. Interesting to know, because at least when we're talking incentives, be they parking reduction or whatever, we can start to understand what those have to layer up to, if we decide that's our role. So we're trying to drill on those numbers. We need more.
8,000 a door?
6 to 8.
Okay, thank you.
In a typical wood frame,
Yeah,
4 to 6 area. We have not specifically asked the should it be capped question. I apologize through the chair. We still need to, I think, ask that in a very informed and fair way, because when we pull out one question, if I simply ask should it be capped, and I think this was the point of the question, if we don't say what the impacts of capping it or not capping it are, and that's been very difficult for us to inform that conversation on.
Yeah, thank you. So, and that's why I said don't put just one thing. I said, we should have, ramp it up or anything in between. And what are the consequences financially? I mean, 95% of the people out there think of one thing: what's going to be the impact of my annual property tax? Is it going to have to go up $10, $15, $100, $10, $15, $20, or $100 a year because there is money that would generally go to pay for these things that's not going into those general things now, but is going to affordable housing, and therefore the city's going to have to find other ways to get the money that they are diverting into something else to pay for the needed services for the whole population. They need to know that. They've got a right to know that. And so I want the bottom line to be the bottom line.
If I can, through the chair. I know many of these points came up in the earlier discussions around that, and by all means, we'll take that away and we'll look at that and try to present that information. However, I would just point out that from the staff's perspective, we're working with what we've got now. We're not there advocating for greater density bonusing or lesser. It is what it is, but we can ask those questions.
Thank you.
All right. So, Councillor Asmussen.
Well, thank you very much. I guess I'm going to be sort of talking the similar lines of Councillor O'Neill. When we were last in front of us a while back, before we went for consultations, one of the issues that counts for me is one of the foundational questions I wanted asked in a consultation that hasn't been asked is, should city assets or funds be used to subsidize housing? Because that's what we're talking about from the city's perspective. And I think the public should be asked that question, because in the report, when you talk about using land sales or a portion of density bonus, because right now we use density bonus to provide amenities, and we have done for many years within that development area, or we use land sales, as we presently do, to provide amenities, whether it's the new swimming pool, ice rink, the new dry floor facility. We use that. When we take a density bonus and land sales and use it for affordable housing, we are then, to replace that amount of money, we are going to, if we want those same facilities, we're going to have to do a tax increase. It's actually a hidden way of hiding a tax increase that you're really doing for affordable housing. You're taxing it. The other question I'd asked before, and I wanted to ask the public consultation, would the public support a levy on every housing unit of $25 or $50? If you go $25 on 48,000 units, you get $1.2 million. If you do $50, it's $2.4 million a year. And then that's, by more housing units, that just naturally grows. And then the whole of the community, if they believe that the city should be subsidizing, is not spread across. I think one thing we talked about is you have a developer in an area that buys buildings that were, I think Mayor Stewart says this best, was bought, somebody built purpose rental buildings years ago. They're now old, needing to be replaced, and they're being told that they have to replace for their development, not that community. that area, or should it be the whole city, as I said, with the levy? I think that question, I was asking for that last time, and I didn't see those two questions. But I think, once again, to tagging on what Councillor Neal, we both, I guess, have the same feeling about this. Just because we have an affordable housing strategy, is it right or is it wrong? It may not be. Does the public understand? Has the public been asked that question? Do the public see themselves on their property taxes, which is eventually comes down to, as subsidizing housing in Coquitlam? Because no matter which way you slice it, that's what we will be doing, whether it's in partnership or any other direction. If the public supports that, then we're fine with that. We should know that as a council, that direction from the public. I think it's an easy, simple, as I said, foundational question that we should be trying to get from the public. I have some other points in this, and I guess there's some things in here that I always talk about. We talk about under the vision, we're talking about aging in place, or strategy that will guide to promote housing affordability, grows and evolves, with an emphasis on helping provide innovative housing options that allow younger residents to stay in Coquitlam, and aging in place. Now, once again, are we talking about subsidizing for people that live in Coquitlam? I know most of us, I think we were talking at the an event for the on the weekend, and we're talking about a bunch of students, Canadian International Student Society, bringing in students from all over the area, and how that most of the people that live in Coquitlam have come from other areas, because Coquitlam for years was a more affordable area. Not so much now. You took in Neighbourhood and Mission, and generally people will move and live to areas where they can afford. So I know we can talk about our role. Our biggest role in helping that happen always is our ability to create a broad range of housing choices. But in that policy, are we saying that we are going to be subsidizing housing in some way for that? And does that lead to a trap where some people who may stay in Coquitlam, but it winds up not saving or moving out to where they could build that equity somewhere else? So that's another point to this. When I look at the issues in the development industry, and I think Councilor Neal pointed, we talk to a lot of groups that have certain interests, and when the development industry talks about that cost, and for us to waive development cost charges and parking, and I know Councillor Reid will talk about her opinion on reduced parking and the impact it'll have in the neighborhood. Well, the developer may like it. What do we suffer from in the result of that? When we lower development cost charges or any of these city charges that we do, who picks up the cost to replace that? There's only one place that's going to be. It's going to have to be from our existing taxpayer. So when you say, because we're always basing development, bringing in development cost charges, we say to cover the cost. That once again should be shown, as I think what Councillor Neal is alluding to, if I'm not correct, is explaining those things. That when we say where developers don't have to pay these costs, what's the impact back to you, the taxpayer? Yeah, who's picking up that cost? And I don't think this document does a very good job of pointing that out to the taxpayer. I mean, this is going up for consultation. I'm not here to advocate one direction or anything about how we're going to come to this in the end, our decision. What I'm advocating for is some questions to be asked that I think need to be asked of the overall general public and what their feelings are. Because, a lot of these strategies, we get certain groups that come out, and the regular public isn't as busy or as engaged as certain special interest groups, you may say, or groups that are involved. But I think the general taxpayer we need to get that feel from them, from what they see our role and what they see their taxes going to. And in the end of the day, it is being subsidized in some way by whether it's ourselves, the deep subsidy. And I thank you for ruling out deep subsidy. We talked about that in council a long time ago, but leveraging working through partnerships. And I think that's the best way to go. But once again, the public needs to weigh in on the fact that, are they in the game to subsidize? Because when we are partnering at any point, we are putting funds up to subsidize this housing. And I would like that really to be in your next round of consultation.
All right.
Yep.
All right. So, Councillor Reid.
Well, You guys have been given, you two have been given almost an impossible task, as you already know. So my comments are going to be in the middle of the road because is this my job? No, I don't believe it is. Because the money that people pay to the feds in the province, it's supposed to be supporting these kind of programs, but it doesn't seem to be doing the job. I feel that this council went down the path a while ago when 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when we put 3 particular pieces of property up for sale in Burke Mountain, just ready for housing, for affordable housing. And we realized that they're probably not in the right location, and I believe that that was a commitment from a previous council for a certain amount of money, whether I'll say 10 million just because I need to have a number. So we also made a decision that we would take a certain percentage of all the building that we're doing in the town center, and it would go into an affordable housing account and the reserve fund. And I think that should be done. Because the more I sit here and the more since the Master Parks plan has gone in and all kinds of other plans that we're really coming into our own now, we're looking and we're seeing all the extra things that we need in order to accommodate the folks who have no money, who have lots of money, and who are trying to support everybody else. So we really have a need for the money that we're bringing in. It shouldn't be going to one sector. But what could go is the funds, and we've leased property on Como Lake for many years, which is fine. We stepped up to the plate for the 3030 Gordon, the homeless shelter. And I think I would like to see us step up to the plate in a different way. Will I spend the taxpayers' money? I'll say the 10 million if I sold that land. No, I will not. Will I loan it out at a very low interest rate? Absolutely. Can I loan it out to somebody that it would really make a difference to? Absolutely. Can I do fractional housing if we wanted to do it in connection with a bank or Van City specifically, their funds? They have a great program going. Absolutely. But I won't give it away. I'll always keep the money and I will keep using it. And if I can gather some interest on it, I would do that. But I definitely am not interested in perpetuating the Housing Reserve Fund. I would rather take what's in it now, add it to those pieces that we already committed, and I'd like to take that money, and that will be my affordable housing pot. And it's available for borrowing, however we're going to do it. I would like to know, have you talked to the government agents? Now, I still think, and people keep telling, oh, it can't be done, but it can be done. I really believe that a lot of developers will build and they'll sell 25% offshore somewhere of the apartments and just hold on to them. I really think that perhaps Victoria should be looking at trying to partner with some of these developers and saying, okay, we'll take 25% of these because it's cheaper for them to buy them in that way because they'll also get a good discount like they do offshore anyhow. And then for the government to go out and be building more places of their own. And I think there's got to be a way that we can work with that. I want to work for places to promote home ownership for people, but in the affordable housing end. The housing choices and the typologies that you're talking about, I think we've got some really good affordable housing choices. I don't know that we've done enough with it. I think maybe we jumped out too fast and got burnt, and then we pulled back. But now with the Lougheed Neighbourhood plan, if we do a really good housing choices brochure so that people get it, I think we can move forward. Secondary suites, you ask? Well, let me tell you, in my industry, everybody wants one because they want to charge $1,000, $1,200, $1,500, so they're no longer affordable anymore. They're just really expensive suites, and people take them because you can have kids and they're usually ground oriented, and you can have a dog, and it's not so many rules as some of the high rises, and there's parking, be it on our street, of course. I guess when I hear 6,000 to 8,000 a door, well, I think we could work around that in many ways, and I think it could also be maybe helping finance with some of the builders for a certain length of time, 10 years, 15 years, we can do something along that. We certainly could if we did some fractional housing home ownership. So I'm sort of in the middle of I really don't want to do it because I feel that we have a moral obligation to try and provide some, but I will not do it at the expense of all the single parents that are working so hard just to keep their own taxes paid. Because we have, our city is not a wealthy city. We have some areas that have wealthy houses, but we have a lot of areas in our city where people are really struggling. And so I can't see putting people at risk by taking all their money. But I think we have money. I think we can use it, and I think we can be quite smart about it. So I would like to talk to the government organizations about partnerships and the builders and the banks and see if we can't get something going. And I would really like to have a conversation with my colleagues about taking what affordable housing money that was committed by other councils and seeing if there isn't some way we can use that to further our efforts here. But I really don't want to continue taking more money from the reserve fund because I'm watching more and more and more expenses come our way, and that isn't helping us. Thank you.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
Much as I appreciate hearing a lot of Councillor Reid's opinions on the various courses of action that could be taken, I limited my comments to the process and what I wanted to put in front of the public without actually expressing my opinion on them at this stage, which I've done a lot in the past on stuff. But I thought we were today wanting to, and if it's going to be a forum where we can start going through expressing our opinions on what should and shouldn't be done, then I'd like to have another 10 or 15 minutes on that. But at this stage of the game, I thought that what we were doing today was commenting on the consultation process and what questions we wanted to have put in front of the public, if that was being done or not. And so if we wanted to take the discussion further, we can do that. But and I think Councillor Asmundson did as well, just limited his points to generally the consultation process without expressing opinions at this stage. So we've expressed opinions in the past. So I don't know what your feeling is, Madam Chair, but I'd like to keep it more focused on the process. So I thought what we were talking about.
Then I'll reply, Madam Chair. In order to get the people that I want them to discuss things with, they're going to have to just go out to other agencies. I don't see they've spoken to government agencies. I don't know that they've addressed partnership word. I won't give an opinion. I'll just say the partnership word. I don't know if they've discussed government opportunities. I do not know if they've expressed maybe just banks or credit unions. Those are directions that I do not feel that we have covered, that I need to feel that we cover. And so I did it by explaining where I'm coming from. I'm done.
So I appreciate your comments, Councillor O'Neill, and I do. This is a check-in, and I would ask for kind of everyone's feeling on this, but it seems that this is an appropriate time for us to share our thoughts across the board. So we will open up the opportunity for additional comments. But if this seems like a subject that we're asking for a midpoint progress report, right? So what is how does the group feel? Are we okay to share opinions, or do we just want to?
Madam Chair, it's midpoint, and I don't know that they've talked to the people I need to hear about in order to make my decision.
That's perfectly fine in that sense.
Is everybody okay with us moving outside of just the public consultation process and to share points, or would you rather go back to we're just talking about the public consultation?
Just the
Stay focused. Stay focused. Conversation. Stay focused.
Mayor Stewart, that would be wonderful if you would step in.
On that point, I think it's entirely appropriate if the public consultation, if the direction that's going to be put before the public has shortcomings or has things left off, if we haven't contemplated the consulting with the credit unions or whatever, to cite Mayor Reid's example, I think that's an entirely appropriate. I think we ought to, at this point, still refrain from diluting that focus by also talking about the extent to which we want to apply these funds to that thing, or to what kind of housing forms might be best approved, because that's going to come out of the consultation process. Is this document the right one to get that stuff out? And I think let's focus on, let's make sure the process from our perspective, let's not be able to criticize the process at the next meeting when we get the results back from the process and say, well, it's too bad we didn't ask this question. Let's mention that question now.
All right, thank you. So next person to speak then, we've all decided that we're going to focus on this document. Councillor Hodge.
Well, thank you, because I was going to lead off with I have lots to say about this, as I'm sure everybody does, but I really want to talk about this part of it. Because the time will come where we'll get to have more than enough time to talk and give our political views and everything. And I think we all have differing views, and I think they're valid views. But I want to hear what our residents have to say, because this does affect them in some ways financially. You can draw pathways and connect dots, and eventually it does affect them. So I think that it's fair. They do need to know what the costs are. I think we need to know what the costs are to society, to our ability to have a workforce that lives here. So I think we need to look at some of the costs that are not just monetary costs of what if we do this and what if we don't do it. I think we need to have that spelled out so that the general public can see that. You mentioned in your slide presentation that there's still some disconnect with other communities do, and how they do it. So everybody does it differently. And it is very difficult to quantify, but I think it's important to know what our neighbors do, because from a building standpoint, our builders compete with other other cities where they're going to build. They want to see somewhat of a level playing field. I think what I heard in your report them saying is they like the idea that we spell out our requirements, that there's no trading, well, if you build this, we'll give you this, and how much you think you're going to make on this building. There's none of that. We're very transparent. I think that's one of the pluses from the building standpoint. But I think equally, I would like to see it a little bit spelled out as to what do our neighbors do, what do they feel their obligation is to their community, how do they fund it. So I just like to see a little bit more of that on the grid, and I think it's important for our residents to see that. I like the piece on affordable living. It's something that I've talked about for years now. I'd like to see that developed a little bit more. I noticed that there has been a few more suggestions out there, not just building your transit stations, keeping transportation costs. I'd like to see that fleshed out a little bit more as to what are the things that make living affordable. What is it that the city does? What is it the industry does? So just build on that component a little bit more for people to have a look at that. And again, I think we've touched on what is our role. In some cases, that may be a discussion for around this council table. But I'd also like to hear from the residents, just specifically, what do you think our role is? Both the role as taxpayers and residents, but also what do they think the role of the city is? What do they see our role as councillors in this, and the decisions that we will make on their behalf? A little bit more on the funding side, and maybe I think a little bit better explanation of the bonus density, because we've heard that people sort of say, well, my taxes go up. Well, I suppose if you draw enough dots, eventually everything comes back to the taxpayer. But where does the money come from? Is it an increase in height? We often hear people say, well, you can't make money come out of thin air. But then you also hear that, well, there's lots of thin air. If we go up into that thin air, are we actually creating wealth and new land? We're creating land in the sky is what we're doing. And who owns that land in the sky? Is that new wealth that can be shared? Or is that wealth that belongs to the taxpayers? And I think we have to draw a little bit more the correlation, because I think a lot of our taxpayers just want to tie it to my annual property tax. And I think we have to sort of spell out a little bit the funding formulas and what what that implication can be, because as other councillors have said, is, well, could that money be used for other things? So I think I'd like to see a little bit more on that piece. And just some of the opportunities, I think, sort of showing how money can be used. I do like Councillor Reid's comment, and I agree with her, but without trying to stray too far off of this, I'll just say I agree with the idea of keeping the money as the city, not giving it away, but looking at ways that we can keep the money, loan it out for 50 years, but build on it. Or maybe a couple of examples of how that $1 million can be leveraged and what it can create, and still have that. And what do we have? We have an increase in the value of assets in our community that are taxable. So does that $1 million become a $5 million property that then will pay taxes back to the city over a 20-year period of time based on a $5 million value? So I'd like to see sort of a little bit more of how some of these formulas work, and what is the real cost and benefit. So I'm looking for maybe more of a cost and benefit, both in dollar terms, but also in society terms. And I think just sort of some of that comparisons, I think it's important to have that discussion. I know we will have that discussion here. Some of us have, with us every time this comes back, we want to get into that discussion. I think it's an important discussion. But I'd like to hear how residents, if they were sitting at this table, and if residents were sitting here, and if we could put 120,000 people around this table, what would that discussion look like, and what would I hear from them? Thank you.
All right, Mr.
Thank you. I had a whole bunch of notes, and I was about to be caught in a trap of going down a path of expressing my opinion on some subjects, and I thank Councillor O'Neill for that. I look at the bottom of page, and so I'm actually looking at this. So on the bottom of page 6, it refers to other cities in our region, suggesting that comparisons are different. And I have always said, I mean, I've worked on housing projects and neighborhood projects across Canada, except for the Maritimes, several U.S. states on both sides of the United States, in Europe and Asia and Australia and Africa, and there are no cities like Vancouver. I can't think of any because we're hemmed in so much, and so that, as Councillor Hodges mentioned, it's that we have to find new air, we have to find new dirt, and new capacity for housing, and it's going to be on footprints that have already been built on in most cases. So, and it's that creativity that we're trying to bring to bear. There are certainly some solutions in other countries that will work here, but we have to find them. There's a couple of, and one of the things that I always worry about on this, I've been working on what we used to call affordable housing, but then that came to be referred to as a specific type of housing that's subsidized. And so, but in our report, we use affordable housing in the way CMHC used to use it as housing which is affordable, or rather households that are paying less than 30% of their income on the housing that they have. And therefore, we're not using it for a particular subsidized form of housing. And that's on page, what is that? Page 3 of the draft, the middle paragraph. Households that spend more than 50%, sorry, page before that. Okay. In Coquitlam, 25% or over 10,000 of the city's 41,000. So 25% of the households spend more than 30% on housing. On the next page, in the middle paragraph, in the second column, it is anticipated the proportion of Coquitlam housing households paying more than 30% of their income on housing will exceed 25% in 2023. So they say it's already at 25% and it will exceed that, or it already exceeds that now, and it will exceed that in 5 years as well, or 10 years as well. So we'll have to tidy up those numbers, but I'm not sure that we are spending the right amount of. My mom used to laugh because she would travel around the world 4 months a year, and she was in core need for housing because she didn't have any income, but she had assets, and so and a free and clear house and all kinds of retirement income left by my father. So I want us to carve off those ones for whom housing affordability isn't the issue as we define it. We define it based on income, and there's a lot of people that are asset rich and have no income. And then that percentage will grow in the coming years. And I don't know of a measure that's actually solve that. So a little, perhaps an asterisk that clears up, so that we're not including those who actually aren't looking for a solution, because there's all kinds of options available to them by virtue of their assets. And that'll allow us to focus a whole lot more on those that are in core need, those ones who absolutely need a solution. And our job is to behave. Unfortunately, with the automobile market, there's manufacturers out there struggling to find a unique niche. They're trying to find that niche. In a constrained land supply, the niche gets dropped if it's not as profitable as the other niches. And so there's no one trying to produce. We see it now on the housing choices stuff. We end up with 2,200 square foot. All four of them are 2,200 square foot. No one's building the 1,300 square foot single family. That was the affordable Clover Valley Station stuff 20 years ago. And I don't know how to produce a document that allows people to scream out what sides do they want, what is their, not what sides do they aspire to, but what will meet their needs. Because we're letting the market sometime determine the needs, or rather the producers determine what the market needs, rather than what the market needs. How do we do that? Like May, for example, at one point said there's going to be a market for larger townhouses up on there, and we ended up with Secret Ridge, and it was absolutely popular. Now, how do we find the ones where the market isn't screaming because it doesn't have a lot of money and the needs there, but the 2,200 is more profitable. The 1,300, I would be really excited to see someone come in and do a housing choices using a 1,400 3-bedroom top floor house. I don't know where you get those. So how does that? But how do you get that in here? Bruce?
Through the chair, knowing your background, sir, I know that market analysis is an interesting thing that developers use. And you swing to that one thickest spot, right? Highest and best use. And market analysis will always take you to that most common piece. I think our housing choices program that we unleashed a few years ago may have been ahead of the curve. I think I heard that term. I think it was the right thing. I do think that we, as part of our own program, need to go back. There might be some angles that we can pull on that. I'm not sure we haven't regulated ourselves into a knot on some of those. I don't know if we can solve the market. That doesn't mean we can't make our own behavior the best behavior to go by. That's my first drive into that. And now I'm just dangerously waxing. We'll see if Jim kicks me under the table.
Well, it's not. By clarity, I want to clarify that it's highest and best use isn't the challenge. It's when the market is choosing thickest residual.
Yes, but within that, it's also how about a different term? That thickest residual is often the safest play as well, right? And that risk is a developer risk, and that's a hard part to come to the market. That if you build it, they will come, and those are wonderful success stories when we hear them. They usually, though, I'm thinking of an example in Abbotsford, you take a stray piece of land that wasn't going to fit that normal model, and you can put something together. I think we have to be open to that kind of innovation, and part of what I'm saying is making sure our own regulations don't block that type of opportunity. So.
Yeah, if I could, that would be my response too. And I think actually, in a nice way, it captures a reasonable, doable role for the city as a municipality. We do the planning function, we do the land use regulation, we do the development approvals. On occasion, we have property. Actually, we have property that's earmarked and has been received specifically for this. Is there not an opportunity to do a demonstration project where we can get at how can we get that affordable ownership? Some of these other more innovative ways of financing. Let's lead by example. Obviously, we'll look for partners to help us with that. It won't solve everything for everyone, but at least it pushes the boundaries out in some areas. There may be other things. And interesting here what we hear at the public open house, the consultation, and we hear this now on occasion. People are going, well, I'd like to have my parents stay on my property, but I also like to have a suite downstairs to help pay for my mortgage. How can we package this? And maybe it means revisiting some ideas we had earlier around the housing choices that got rolled back because there was some neighborhood opposition to that. So again, if we want to function the role of leaders, we sometimes need to push in those areas and look at that. So those would be some thoughts. But it's good feedback for us to take away and see where we need to tune this up.
Yeah, and I'd love to have this conversation at some point as whether council has the appetite for a demonstration project, finding a massive backyard pie-shaped cul-de-sac lot like Danforth, for example, or something, where we go out and allow innovation.
If I could, Your Worship, sometimes we're not quite good enough to ourselves. I think past councils, they've made decisions around some city sites. I was here, I was at this table, and I think we've done some bold things. And again, it's not going to solve the world's problems, but Coquitlam took a stand, Coquitlam took a shot at doing something. And so there is a bit of a tradition here around that.
Thank you, Mr. McIntyre. Do you have to do so? Councillor Marsden?
A couple of things. This is a great body of work, and I think it's something that, as we move forward, is going to very well mesh with the housing affordability, or the housing choices component, because I think it is important. The one piece that I would ask as we go out to consultation is be very, very clear in terms of terminology that we're utilizing. I think what we talk a lot about here, we talk about affordable housing, and it's very quickly intertwined with subsidized housing. And I think a lot of the conversation you've heard in the past is going to be that concern about whose role is it. I think we all have a role. Every level of government has a role to play in helping create environments where we can have strong, robust, fully inclusive communities. That does not necessarily mean, and the only opinion I'm going to provide is I don't think my role is to own subsidized housing here as a city. But we have a role to play in providing densities, et cetera, that enable us to have our kids grow up, move out of the house, get their first rental home, and they can afford to be there while they're getting their part-time job and getting there. That's part of affordable housing. Letting our seniors age in place is part of affordable housing. And there's another segment of it, which is subsidized housing. We have individuals in our community, I dealt with many, many clients that would buy stratified condo projects and rent them out through various senior government funding models where individuals are receiving subsidized housing. So our piece here, I think, is to make sure we separate those two, that our question isn't to the community when we go to the open house, do you think that could be a separate question, do we have a role to play in subsidizing? But affordable is, let's talk about the scope of things that we can do and the things that we can control. Really looking at the zoning, looking at the density, how high do we want to go? We look to Burquitlam as an example, and what we're going to see there, we're going to see some towers. We look down the road to Lougheed Town Center where we've got, Burnaby's choices. What are they going to do there?
27
20, exactly. And how high? Where's our fit? What do we want to do to make sure our neighborhood fits? We want to make sure that it looks good, but we maximize the opportunities. So at the UDI luncheon, it was very clear. They said the space we have, and you've got part of it in here, it's density. What do we need to do? Let's make sure that we understand that, and then so we can go back and say, this is what we want. We want opportunities to have rental properties near the transit hubs. We've got to have that. Who owns them? Who manages them? Whether some of them are subsidized, I think, are all discussions that we go down a different path, a different time. But my one clear piece here is I think we got to ask people in layman's terms. The presentation we saw on the weekend about the Burquitlam-Lougheed neighborhood plan, layman's terms, people could understand that. Let's make sure that we use that same thought process here, and don't try to pigeonhole affordable and subsidized all into one. They are two very, very separate discussions.
It's not
Anything else?
affordable, it might have subsidized.
Anything else?
Good.
Councillor Asmundson?
Yeah, just a couple things I forgot. In your report, your objectives and policy 213, you talk about tailoring utility rates. Page 11. And, I read this and I looked at it and I'm going, tailoring utility rates. Now, what are you talking about? Some people may think, is this strict? When you talk about change city bylaws, the only utility rates that we regulate are water and sewer rates. what a lot of people are concerned about in affordable housing is energy rates are about the second most factor in cost. And so you talk about increased efficiency in multifamily housing development. One of my biggest pet peeves for many years has been baseboard heating, but we come up against the building code. So we can't regulate or impact that area. So I just think this question here needs to be fleshed out better to the limitations of what the city, when you're talking about utility rates, and what our efficiencies or energy efficiency when the buildings are limited. I just think that needs to be clarified a bit.
I'm just catching up to you, Councillor, but I know Jim and myself and Kathy have made note of that, so we'll drive around that question again. 2.1.3, you mean?
Yeah, and the last thing just comes on land. You know, a couple reports I read just recently, we talk about putting lower income housing close to transit and everything, but highest land cost. Secondly, most desirable area for people wanting to buy and invest. So how do we do that in an area which is, there's been great difficulties in other areas now putting lower income housing close to transit just because of the demand and the cost involved. And it comes back to the issue of subsidy.
All right. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks. I want to thank everybody who's worked on this. I know it's been a very long project, and you've worked very hard, and you've managed all kinds of different conflicting thoughts and advice and opinions. So I want to thank you for all your hard work. And I think a lot of it is great. I really love the stuff about the partnerships and all that. I mean, definitely it's essential, and we need to really become experts at being partners. I totally love the shared equity model. I think that's a huge opportunity for people to get their foot in the door, and it really targets that part of the spectrum. Like when Dennis was talking about, there's the whole spectrum from homeless shelters to single-family houses. That targets one of those pieces of the spectrum really well, and I think there's a whole ton of people out there who could really benefit. So I really like the shared equity a lot. The one thing though that I think was missing in this, and I don't know, maybe I was misguided, and for some reason I thought it was going to come back in this, and obviously I was wrong. Was a bit of information on inclusionary zoning. Because it's a very popular form of very popular tool to create affordable housing. It's used all over North America. It's used in Richmond, Vancouver, North Shore, and it's absent from all of this. And I looked at I wasn't on council at the time, but I went back and looked at the documents that were available from the affordable housing workshop that was put on, and there was nothing really in there about inclusionary zoning. And the two cities that have the most experience and the most success with it were Richmond and Vancouver, and they weren't part of it. And so I just wondering, and if anybody's not sure what I'm talking about in terms of inclusionary zoning, it's when you provide greater density in return for non-market rental units in that development. Vancouver asks for between 10 and 20%. Montreal asks for between 20 and 30%. Richmond asks for 5%. I talked to the mayor of Richmond about this at length a while ago, and he said it's been extremely successful in Richmond. They're actually looking at increasing the percentage of units that they're asking for. So I was wondering if you could explain why it's not part of the suites of offerings that we're providing.
Mr. McIntyre, you have some insights on that?
Yes, I can provide some observations. Actually, maybe just a quick history of this. Coincidentally, or ironically, the city's current density bonusing system goes back to an interest in affordable housing plus other community amenities. When I came to the city, there was a number of, and this was just focused on the city center area, or C4 zone. There was a number of policy objectives and goals in the zoning, C4 zoning, whereby you get, for every square foot of accessible housing or adaptable housing, you got 2 square feet of residential. Employment generating space, you got residential. you know, there was some lofty social goals there and community goals. Unfortunately, aside from the commercial residential transition, it wasn't being taken up by the market at the time. And so looking at the zoning bylaw and reflecting and recognizing that, but also there were members of council at the time saying, well, what are we doing about affordable housing? And so staff went away, and we looked into it, and we did check around a number of years ago, and we came back with a proposal to set up a density bonusing where it'd be, let's get right down to it, so much floor area, so much money. And the thinking had been that rather than obligating the developer to provide a certain number of units, a certain percentage of the floor area, or a number of units per 100 residential units for affordable housing, we would keep the equation, the metric being money. And that's basically how the density bonus system works. For each floor, you achieve greater density, additional floor area, that floor area has a value, and we share in that value. The city shares in that value. And that was the basis, the original basis for the system. It gained the support of council at the time. I thought it went towards the first step in a housing affordability program. And it proved pretty successful. And we then later realized, well, it's a pretty good tool. We can go to all these other needs. Can we not expand the density bonusing system? That was direction from council. And so we went back and we did that review and came back with a new system for C4. We actually took that, eliminated all the other bonus density provisions, and just put that system in. Subsequent to that, then we rolled that out across the other areas, Burquitlam, like the C7 zone and some of the multifamily stuff. So in a way, we had dealt with inclusionary zoning by not putting it in terms of a number of units or floor area, but in terms of a cash value. Through all those various stages and revisions to the bylaw, there was a lot of discussion at council, and we acted on council's direction, and that's how we got to where we are today. We will look at other, we have been looking at other communities, and I'm going to let Bruce speak to that, because he and Kathy have been doing a lot of research. We do want to go out and talk with some of our municipal neighbors. We've heard a lot about Richmond. It's a little bit like that NAIOP survey. You hear a lot of good news, but sometimes there's a flip side to it as well. And so we want to make sure we're getting the straight story. So, maybe Bruce.
Yeah, Jim's point is well taken. That there's been discussion on that item related to density bonusing, and in many ways, I think that's appropriate. To me, what inclusionary zoning is asking a developer to contribute units at a certain level that you kick in. What density bonusing is asking a developer at a certain level to kick in dollars. So really, to me, the discussion that we want to get around first ourselves is, how much is that requirement? Then you ask yourself, well, what does that requirement come in? It's generally been the drive inside the strategy, and I'm here to listen and change as directed, of course, but it's generally been the drive inside this strategy that dollars are more flexible than units. And Vancouver, the city of, who is one of 3 municipalities, Vancouver, Richmond, and North Vancouver, use both inclusionary zoning and density bonusing. But the city of Vancouver actually did their own study that's just on mixed price projects, you end up building fewer units with inclusionary zoning than if you take the dollars. We have not yet visited a Kiwanis project. I'd love to in Richmond and see their take on the same question. But I think whether you ask for it as an inclusionary zone, an inclusionary unit, in Richmond's case, if you have a project over 80 units, 5% of the unit total has to be dedicated as affordable. So it's 5% inclusionary zoning. That's on top of their density bonusing. I think our question is, how much do we want to ask? And then once we ask how much, what is the best vehicle? All density bonusing, which is what is currently drafted. You could go all inclusionary, or you could go some combination, or of course, you could go none. So we haven't gone much further than that, largely because the feedback we seem to be getting is dollars give you more discretion, more ability to do different things. The question that you hear, I keep hearing around the table, the trade-off, and do we have the dollar amount right? And I think that's an easier one to settle where I could then come back and probably project some numbers for you and say, here's how many units you'd get if it's dollars, here's how many you'd get if it's dollars and inclusionary. But it is drawing from that same developer pool.
So that's good historical background and everything. When we talk about money versus units, obviously, yes, money would be more flexible, but I guess I would say that if that's how we want to incorporate inclusionary zoning, then our dollar value is too low. Because when I look at Richmond, if it's 80 units, it's 4 units they got to provide. I look at the affordable housing component from the BD tower connected to the YWCA project. I think that was about 185 units, or let's say 180 units. And we got $260,000, I think, in affordable housing contribution. So basically, it's 1 to 180, right? So it's almost 0.5%, right, compared to what Richmond's doing, or what Vancouver's doing, or what Montreal's doing. So I don't want to. And Richmond's not even giving any extra density in return for that 5%. So they seem to be doing quite well. Last thing I want to do is make housing extremely unaffordable for people buying into the market. But I just would have liked us to have explored that option maybe a bit. And I don't know if it's too late to incorporate that in our public consultation. Councilor O'Neill wanted sort of all the information out on the table in terms of dollar value. Well, I think this is a really important option out there that we're not putting out there, right? And so I think it would be ideal if we could get some feedback on what the public thinks of that.
And if I may overstep a little bit, it's certainly not staff's job. Ours is to investigate, to bring back choices, to bring back information to council, and to write the policy that council tells us to write. If we need more information on inclusionary zoning, absolutely. Off the top of my head, Richmond's piece doesn't just apply to larger. They do $2 to $4 per square foot on smaller projects, which essentially would fill that gap we have where industry has said there's incentives aren't working at the 4 to 6. So if we need to provide for council more information, and then if council wants us to do whatever council directs us to do with that, that's fabulous. But if we've been remiss in providing that study, we can definitely bolster that up.
And on the topic of the full disclosure of money, I think we need to disclose all parts of it if we're going to do that, right? Because people need to know that we're getting over $200 million in bonus density money, and how we're getting that money, right? And we're getting that money through all the redevelopment in that area. But in a lot of cases, we're displacing a lot of the people who can't afford to live elsewhere in our community. And I know when I've talked to a lot of people about the situation going on in Burquitlam, people think it's wrong, that we don't have a rental replacement policy, that these people are probably going to have to move out of the community because we don't have enough low-cost rental housing for them. And especially when they understand the kind of money that the city's bringing in bonus density money. So if we're going to be doing full disclosure, which I agree with, then let's look at the bottom line of everything, the financial bottom line and the social bottom line. Right? There's a real importance in having the whole spectrum of housing in a community. An economic development need to have the people in our community who live in these kind of units, because they are in a lot of cases the employees. So many of our new immigrant families that come to our community use these low-cost rental housing units as a starting point to develop a whole new lifespan. So anyways, enough of that. But if we're going to do full disclosure, then we got to do the social bottom line as well as the economic bottom line. As far as I'm concerned, and back, but my question about the inclusionary zoning was you guys all went on and on and on. So please, give me a chance here, okay?
I look at what Richmond has done since 2007. How long we had our affordable housing fund?
2008.
So since 2007, at least 973 housing units have been secured in a variety of the strategy's affordable housing categories. Right? And so they've been very successful in having a very robust inclusionary zoning and cash in lieu. So I think that's something that I would love us to look at in here because it is very successful. And for me, that was sort of the one thing that I saw that was missing from the document. But just one last thing, too. We say it's not our responsibility. Well, the federal government used to fund it, then the provincial governments used to fund it because they thought it was important, right?
Point of order, Madam Chair, really. If we're going to make political speeches, I'll make a political speech on my fundamental philosophy as well. And I didn't do that. We raised the subject. Let's keep it focused on the consultation, please.
So I think we'll, again, go back to the consultation.
The need is still there, and if the other governments aren't going to fill it, I think we have a responsibility to fill it. So that's all I'm saying.
Are you finished, Councillor Wilson?
I'm done.
Great. Mayor Stewart.
It's partly in response to that, because ultimately the public gets to offer their opinions. We know that the Richmond example was successful. There's no question. They raised the price of housing in order to make housing more affordable for the low end, and that's most people will give it some thought.
It's just a point of order. That's not what I'm suggesting we do.
No, I'm just saying.
No, but don't.
Okay, but that's what inclusionary zoning does. So I want us to.
In return for higher density. Than
hang on.
Okay.
As the chair, just a second. I understand it's a very emotional topic, and I think there's going to be lots of time for us to have these discussions. So stay in order and give me a break because I'm chairing today for the first time. Mayor Stewart.
We compared notes before. We thought we'd put you to the test. I just want us to make sure that if we're going to let's set out in a consultation process another form of housing or another form of funding of the housing, and that is, in this case, put the burden on new housing to supply affordable housing as well. Then that needs, I think it's, we have to be very careful how we lay that out, because it's not a panacea. So I'll stop there.
Yes, I hear what you're saying. Okay, Councillor Hodge.
Well, yeah, I was interested in this because this is something sort of a new area that we've sort of, I think in the past we've sort of touched on it, on the inclusionary zoning, but this is sort of, we're sort of starting a discussion here, and this is not the appropriate time to have this discussion, but I think it's a discussion that we need to have. And I think we need to have that out in the community as well. So I'm going to echo the part that Councillor Wilson said about, let's put that out there, because I think you can't have these discussions without looking at all options. And I made this comment when we were talking about the large home study that's coming out. There may be some things in there we don't agree with, but I think that you need to have that discussion out in the community to fully flesh that out, partly from the discussion standpoint, but also to see what the appetite is from the community to embrace those options. And this goes back to what I said earlier about looking at what our neighboring communities are doing. If this is something that Richmond is doing, I'd like to hear a little bit more about it, and I think that the residents should know about it, because it is to not discuss it and later try to put in an affordable housing strategy, people will come back to say, well, why didn't you do what Richmond did? So, or why didn't you do what somebody did? So I think by having that discussion now, we can flush it out, have that discussion, and then later we can say, this is why we didn't do it. So I think it's important to have this as part of it and to add that piece to it. Just to be on the record, maybe it's good, maybe it's not going to work, but I think at least include it in the discussion.
Mr. McIntyre, would you like to make a comment?
Just say
I think you're looking at me to make a comment.
Say taking all the notes.
It's all good. No, actually, Madam Chair, I'd like to have all council, if anyone else wants to speak, we want to hear it all. And then I'm weighing it to my mind, and look, we're good. You know, if we've heard from one side, we're hearing from the other side, we will take it out there. We'll try to describe what inclusionary zoning is. We'll try to drill into what the cost implications might be. You know, we can try to crystallize that and put that out to the public. But I'd like, if that's the direction, I'd just go away today, knowing that council's okay with that. So that would be my ask again.
Pros and cons.
Yes, pros. I think that's the thing, pros and cons.
But if there's, Madam Chair, if there's any other comments around the table, let's capture. I want to make sure we got the.
Yeah.
the
Well, I
bag
think,
full here.
I didn't hear anyone that was objecting to making, to presenting other sides of the argument. So, was there anyone else who wanted to speak? Because I was going to speak before anyone else. Just hold this. Okay. Councillor Town.
I just want to say this for people who are listening, because I'm new at all of this, and I read it all, and I had lots of questions. A lot of it's been answered today. But if there's anybody listening today that doesn't really know what the affordable housing reserve fund money goes into that, but then what do we do with that money? I don't think the city then builds a complex, because we're not in the role of operating affordable housing apartments. So, sorry to sound simple, but when that money goes in there, what's then done with it? So, you know how we talked about the Burquitlam-Lougheed plan? It was done in sort of layman's terms and people could understand. I'm just wondering if for people listening or getting ready for the February 18th open house in this consultation, there's a lot of very good information here, but could we explain what that fund, how the fund accumulates and then what you do with that money?
That's what this is for.
Well, make it really short, council has not yet decided how to spend it.
Oh.
We have not spent any of that money yet.
Okay.
That I'm aware of.
Perfect question.
Massive.
And that's where we're
That's what
working
they're
on
gonna
this
find
strategy.
Okay, oh, I see.
This is
That's what the
strategy.
consultation
One of the
is
reasons
for.
why I'm trying to push
Okay.
this along, because
Sorry.
there are options, there are different ideas, but we just need to land on that and get some clarity.
Okay, perfect. And then the only other I wrote was stuff like, is it the priority of the taxpayers, and the same sentiments that have been outlined, so I don't have any other comments or questions.
You can have a meeting with Chris and a meeting with me to get the background.
Oh, no, I have lots of, I guess I was just.
Do it together. Suggesting it should be in that order.
Okay.
No, I
Do it in that
Thank you.
order.
So
be
thank
sheep
you
fun.
to everyone for their flexibility on today's discussion around the table. So my comments, one of the things that was mentioned right at the beginning in your presentation was what are the goalposts? That was the question of BDI. And I looked specifically at this 4 pages because I think that's where the majority of residents will look the closest. And I'm looking at the green box as being the goalposts, where it says what is housing affordability in Coquitlam. And I just made comment that I am concerned that the scope there and is just a little bit too wide. Then it came up in discussion today. I mean, really, are we talking about social housing, or are we talking about all the things that they're in affordability? So I'm just concerned that there may be this may be an unachievable green box in relation to what are the goalposts. So that would be my only comment for this one document.
Thank you.
We may answer this backwards, but in terms of what the Urban Development Institute was suggesting to us in terms of goalposts, is right now the way the strategy is drafted, is we suggest one of the potential uses for the reserve fund is we ask if a developer's coming forward, maybe they can be creative, maybe they can work within their own system and suggest some things they could do. And we suggest tools on the table, including, can they make a proposal to us of somebody they could partner with? Could they make a proposal to us of maybe they want to try to use the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund in a way that we've outlined in terms of guiding principles? What industry came back and said at us is we don't know Coquitlam as well as others know Coquitlam. We would feel more comfortable if there was a clear understanding of what your ask was, what the goal line looks like, as opposed to having us guess as we go through the process. The other hand of the question where we're hearing people ask about targets is similar to 1 or 2 other cities which have set numerical targets. This many of this type of unit at this affordability. So we've heard other stakeholders suggest that's something that should be in our strategy, whereas that's a slightly different comment of goalposts that industry is saying. You know, what are the requirements versus what are you guys going to try to accomplish, and then measure yourselves against that.
Okay. Well, and thank you for that. I'm just saying things like, I'm just concerned that being able to find a place to live that you can afford, is it achievable? Is that achievable that everybody that comes to Coquitlam or is in Coquitlam will be able, when this is done, to be able to find a place to live that they can afford. I mean, that's all I'm saying is that, you know, maybe our scope is so wide that it's just unachievable in the end.
I certainly wouldn't connect that green box to the targets. That green box is closer to what we mean by the term housing affordability, since we introduced that versus the older term in the last strategy, affordable housing. In terms of targets, I think that's very much falls in the questions we've discussed today. What is our role? How much is fund going to be? And then what does that fund try to accomplish?
So perhaps we could change the green box to those three questions directly and flip it. All right, and Councillor Wilson, you had another.
If you're done.
I am, but
Okay, so one last question about the consultation. Sometimes context is really helpful. So could we put something in there about like really explicitly about the fact that the federal government is not funding these types of programs anymore for the lower end of the spectrum. The provincial government is not funding them as much as they used to. So just so people understand what the reality is, what the context of the situation is, because if people don't understand that, obviously they say, well, I don't want to have anything to do with this because it's their responsibility, right? So is that possible to frame that clearly in this so that when we do the consultation, people understand the context?
Both in the discussion paper and the framework, we do reference the federal governments and the province and their role changing. However, with caution, we then hear back from organizations like the province that, no, that's not representing us. This is what we do. And I believe there was a short letter that came from the minister recently to that point, that feel they do much more than we would portray. So we are in a tough spot.
Okay.
And as well, we don't want to antagonize our potential partners. They are one of the key stakeholders we're consulting with, but we will look at that as well as part of the public information package. Madam Chair, if there's no other comments.
Is there any other comments before we close this one up?
I move receipt then.
Second.
Yes, go ahead, Mr.
Just
McIntyre.
very briefly, thank you again. I know it's not an easy policy area for discussion. And actually, I'm glad we did check in now, because it's better now than getting down to the end of the constellation coming into, and then what about this and what about that? So that's okay.
Thank you.
So thank you. However, that said, I think keeping to our ambitious timeline that we've set for ourselves is probably unrealistic, particularly if we're going to capture this and have it in a non-jargony way, cover the range of suggestions we heard this afternoon, getting the information out, because a lot of that information is there in the discussion paper. It's just got to be pulled out and out of that document made more accessible and user-friendly. We'll need a little more time for that, to be honest. So we will get back to council. We're going to have to go back and do a debrief and just see what a reasonable schedule is. We'd still like to move this forward, but we'll just need a little bit more time to pull together a proper plan.
I see Mr.
And I could comment on that. You know, I know Jim really did want to wrap this up. We've had many discussions on it, and I continually ask him, you know, where is it in the relative priorities of all the other things that he's doing, because there are a lot of things on planning's plate right now. He assures me he really wants to get this done because he doesn't want to do it forever. Having said that, there is a lot of really good requests for extra information. I believe this has to take longer, but we want to get it done right. So with that comment, I think we should just go forward, recognizing the timeline will be a little bit different than what's shown in these documents.
So does that mean that the February 18th open house then will be delayed? Is that what you're proposing?
I think what we need to do is absorb your questions, see where we are compared to what we had planned for it, which a great deal of what you said we are ready for. Can I revise in time? Can I revise in time for other issues that you've brought up today to cover the 18th? If not, I have two choices. I could look at a staggered open house. We can do one sort of informational piece now on the 18th, ask some of the more detailed questions further on, or I can just delay the process. And I think we sort of need to go and brain trust on that.
Okay.
I'm unwilling to kill it today until I can understand if I can really bring it forward on the 18th with the way that I think I've heard the direction to be.
On the other hand, we would not want to go out with an incomplete package, not covering the bases of the council, based on the questions and comments we heard today. I'm reluctant to do that too.
All right. Well, the momentum is there. We're moving it quickly. You've said that we want to keep the momentum going, so very good discussion today.
And from my perspective, the 18th is still possible, but it's I think it's way less than 50% probability of pulling it off on that. We have to discuss all that. Jim's going to be away for a bit. We got to get this right. And so
All right,
I think it's going to be.
Receipt
We, if they can do inhuman things, they may still be able to, they may be able to convince all of us they can do it, but there's other issues out there that we have to also pay attention to that are just as important.
Receipt moved by Councillor O'Neill and second,
Yeah,
and second by Councillor Asmundson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you so much for that, and thank you again for everyone's flexibility and
Move adjournment?
no, we don't know.
Oh, no,
An OB.
so sorry.
OB1 is the regulation of e-cigarettes, which was raised by Councillor Zoriolo.
Thank you very much. So there's been lots of news recently about the e-cigarettes, different communities that are looking at e-cigarettes, and I'm hearing it more from parents. And as a parent, I am concerned. I think my colleagues know that I am concerned about this for our youth. Just some of the things that were published in the last week or so. The CBC News covered a story back in December that now in the U.S., 9% of 8th graders are vaping or have tried e-cigarettes versus 4% smoking. 16% of 10th graders have tried vaping versus 7% for smoking. And over the last 40 years plus, as taxpayers, we have paid millions and millions and millions of dollars to educate our kids not to smoke. And it would be wonderful if the federal government would get on this and maybe make some actions or take some actions around not chipping away at all of that education that we started with our kids. So I thought maybe we could have a discussion today about potentially asking to send a letter to the federal government to take action on this, just in regards to our youth. Okay, Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, when this discussion first came up last year, I guess, and some of the discussion has been about broad bans. I think in Ontario they're talking about broad bans dealing with adults as well. And I'm concerned about and tougher regulations because for many hardcore smokers who weren't able to quit, they've been vaping, and they get tremendous satisfaction from that, and it's way less dangerous apparently than regular smoking. But insofar as we're seeing young people take it up, and if there's some sort of small danger, I don't know exactly how dangerous it is, but yeah, sure, I'm all for supporting us sending a letter asking for the federal government to look at this issue specifically as it relates to youth. I've got no problem supporting something like that. I think, yeah, we need to protect our youth, and if there's a policy gap from the federal government point of view that they could step in and either have some regulatory or some educational program, I'm all for that. No problem. So I'd like to ask them for that. Sure, a little letter would be good.
Anyone else wish to speak on this? Councillor Asmundson.
I think if we can send a letter. I think we ask the federal government on it. The difficulty with vaping is it's not always tobacco or substance that's in there. That's a problem with vaping. Sometimes it's a mixture of different fruits or their people are taking in. So I'd like them to take a look at it for youth and what restrictions they could think of doing. But we've talked about this over a year ago. We went through this, and I don't know if we sent a letter at that time, but we need to send another letter in regards to youth. But it has complexities to it, to what people are actually vaping and they're using in these electronic cigarettes. But I'll support sending a letter, but I think we have to craft it about youth. And I think the federal government has to find a way to regulate it, and I think the difficulty comes from what people are using in it.
Thank you, Councillor Marsden.
Thank you, Chair. As we discussed previously, I've got some firsthand knowledge with this, having a teenage son that decided he wanted to try it because it was, in his words, far safer than smoking. And so I reminded him of days past where we thought smoking was safe, and decades later we find out that perhaps it wasn't. Since he couldn't really tell me exactly what was in the vape or in the cigarette itself, he felt after some discussion that it was probably best if he didn't know what it was and didn't know what he was putting in his body, he should probably defer it. So I think asking the federal government to do some work to help educate our youth a little bit better is the right move. I think our kids, by and large, if you present the information to them, they're going to make the right decisions. And it is the federal government's responsibility in this area. It's not for us to legislate. It's certainly our role is to encourage them to help educate our kids. So I completely support this. I think it's a good move to go.
Thank you. Mr.
Thank you. And I appreciate the conversation we had on the weekend, because this is, I think, the correct mechanism. We ought not to be telling senior governments what to do, but we should be pointing out where there are regulatory gaps. And the void in regulation on, say, medicinal marijuana, for example, we sent a letter to the feds and said, please fill the void, give us something, some regulation. We're not telling you what kind of regulation, we're just telling you that there's a regulatory gap that is presenting challenges for our community. And this is the correct mechanism. I lament the fact that much of the debate in the newspapers often is about banning when local governments have no authority to ban a product. We can't ban we can actually ban the consumption of a product sometimes, like pesticides, cosmetic pesticides. We can ban their use, but we can't ban the sale of pesticides. We can't ban the sale of shark fin. We can't ban the sale of this product. The federal government needs to regulate it.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
Would it make sense also to draft a resolution for the LMLGA conference?
Now, I think there was something, Mr. Dumont, did you want to speak to that?
Sure, I can speak to that. It did go through UBCM last year, and they typically go through LMLGA before they go to UBCM, so I think that's been done already.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. There may be the opportunity, though, for FCM. I don't know if that has been done on a federal level, but there is maybe the opportunity for that. Mr. Dumont, would there?
I'm not aware whether it's been done or not, but we can look into that and send a note to council to confirm.
Okay. So then, could we, as a committee, request that staff write a letter to the federal government requesting that they take action on the regulation of e-cigarettes and perhaps outlining our concern for youth? Or
we would draft it, and it would be for the mayor's signature. I think that's the appropriate way to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Sublin. Is everyone all right for that? As that is direction to staff?
Yep, correct. Good.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Any
And
objection to that?
Any objection to that?
Okay.
And thank you, Mr. Dumont, about follow up on the FCM. All right, so motion to adjourn.
No, we've got to vote on this motion.
Oh, we have
No, there's no motion.
It's not a
No, no,
motion.
just
Just a-
Adjournment.
Otherwise, we have to present a motion to
Okay.
council.
Adjourned, moved by Councillor O'Neill, seconded by Councillor Asmonton. We'll take a
Yep.
10.
Let's see, I actually don't have any.
All in favor? Opposed? Unanimous. Everyone wants to.
Well done for our first meeting.
Outstanding.
No, yeah.